Thank you. First off, I just want to say thank you so much for having me, but thank you more importantly to breaking the chains and for the work that they do. I can say firsthand that nobody goes into this job because it's fun. You have to have such a passion and the deepest well of emotional reserves you can possibly imagine to come back to this job day in and day out, because it is exhausting, it is emotionally draining, and you are pushed beyond what you ever think you can be called to do, especially in the line of a job. It's not just a job to them. So I want to say thank you so much to them, not just for having me, but more importantly for the work that they do. And of course, thank you to everyone for showing up today. I was not trafficked, it's true, but I feel like what I went through, there are so many parallels: fear, manipulation, a lack of control, pain, abuse, rape, violence, neglect. Just, I feel like everything that I experienced, that when I share, it might be easy to think, oh, that is a crazy story. That is insane. But that would never happen to me. That would never happen in my neighborhood. But unfortunately, my story is not unique, nor is it special. And unfortunately, it does happen every day, all the time. So to get to it, I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah. I grew up in a nice neighborhood, had a nice home, a nice family. Nobody ever talked about rape. Nobody ever talked about kidnapping. And if it was don't talk to strangers. Don't take candy from people you don't know. Don't go looking for lost puppies. I mean, it was just that very basic information that I feel like most kids are taught. But there was never a threat of someone breaking into my home and kidnapping me out of bed. I mean, that was something that just did not ever seem like it could possibly be a reality. And it would be actually pretty fair to say that I lived a sheltered life as a kid. I was very, very innocent. Even at 14, I was still very innocent. And I remember in my little 14-year-old mind being about ready to graduate from junior high, which I was very excited about. I'm just not sure that there's a more awkward time in life than puberty. And junior high just seems to be like the pinnacle of that terrible time. And I certainly was not going through that gracefully. I mean, I think awkward is a pretty good word to sum everything that I was up. And I remember thinking that if I could just make it to high school, then everything would be different. I thought that summer between junior high and high school would be all the difference. Of course it wasn't, but that's what I thought. And I just remember being so excited to be done with junior high, so excited for summer, so excited for sleeping in, for no homework, for not having to ride the bus, just excited to be at home all summer long and hang out with friends and have minimal responsibilities. I remember so looking forward to that. And it was the night before I was about to graduate. I remember going to bed that evening. My younger sister, she's about 5 years younger than me. Her name's Mary Catherine. We not only shared a room, we shared a bed. And I remember that night I'd been reading a book to her, and she kept on being one more chapter, one more chapter. So we ended up falling asleep pretty late. It was probably close to midnight by the time we actually fell asleep, because we both had really gotten into this book that I was reading out loud to her. And I remember falling asleep, and the next thing I remember hearing was a man's voice. And when I first heard this man's voice, I disregarded it, because there's no way a man could be in my bedroom. So I just lay there, and then I heard the voice again, repeating the same words again, saying, I have a knife at your neck, don't make a sound, get up and come with me. And the second time that I heard this man's voice saying those words, I remember opening my eyes, and sure enough, there was a man standing above me, and I could feel something cold and sharp lying across my neck. And I remember feeling someone's hand on my arm, trying to pull me out of bed. And truly, for the first time in my life, I knew what it was to be afraid. I knew what it was to be scared. I mean, up until that point, my fears had been pretty small. It was, I don't know, going to school and maybe not having done my homework, or having my parents tell me to go clean my room and then just going up to my room and reading the book instead, and then hearing my dad's footsteps coming towards the door, knowing that I hadn't cleaned the room. Not that, I mean, I might have been scared of it, but at the same time, like, my dad, he would have been upset with me, but he never would have hurt me. He would have reprimanded me and told me maybe I couldn't leave my room until I cleaned it, which for me growing up, that was not a punishment. That was like, yes, I will sit in here and read all day. To the point where my mom would be like, no, you can't do that to her, Ed. She doesn't mind staying up in her room. But anyway, those were the kinds of fears that I had before I was kidnapped. So having a man, a stranger, in my bedroom holding a knife to my neck, that was honestly beyond anything I could have ever imagined happening to me. I remember just laying there, being absolutely petrified, and then realizing or feeling like I didn't have a choice. The only thing I could do was whatever this man told me to do. And so he was telling me to get up. He was telling me to go with him. He had a knife in my neck. What was he going to do if I didn't do what he said? Was he going to kill me? Was he going to take my sister instead? Wasn't it my responsibility as the older sister to protect my little sister, make sure nothing bad happened to her? So I immediately got up and I did exactly as this man said. I remember he walked me into my closet. He specifically pointed out the shoes he wanted me to take. I remember grabbing them, and then I remember him taking me out of my house. Now, my home, actually my bedroom, was on the top floor of our home. It wasn't on a ground level. So he had to bring me all the way downstairs, all the way through the kitchen to our back door before he got me outside. And I remember thinking the whole way down the stairs, the whole way through the kitchen, my parents were going to wake up and they were going to hear something, but they didn't. And then that made me think, did he already kill them? Did he hurt them? Is that why they're not awake? Is that why they're not here? Because they had never let someone take me. Well, we approached the back door, and in my mind, I immediately thought, it's going to be okay. The alarm's going to go off on the back door, and then someone will wake up, and someone will come and rescue me. He opened the back door. The alarm didn't go off. Now, that sounds like it was premeditated. Turns out it was just terrible luck. I'm not an expert in how alarms work, but the way it was explained to me back then, which I'm sure someone in this room could explain to me way better, was that there were magnets that were set in our door frame in our door, and when they were disconnected, it alerted the alarm to make the beeping noise. But I guess the magnet that was set in the door frame or something fell out. Something happened. I don't know. But it did not go off. And so to me, when the alarm didn't go off, I just thought, he has this even more planned. Like somehow he's been able to get past our alarm system on our home. And I remember he led me up through my backyard. Now my backyard, it wasn't fenced. We lived up on one of the mountainsides that overlooks the Salt Lake Valley. And our neighbors' backyards, for the most part, aren't fenced in either. And I remember when we got to the top of my backyard, there is a vacant lot, and then there is a street, and then on the other side of the street are the mountains. I mean, there's no more neighborhood. It's just mountainous. And I remember we got up through this vacant lot, and we were about to cross the street when all of a sudden he pushed me down behind some bushes. He still had his knife on me, and I remember him just holding me down on the ground. And I couldn't move a whole lot, but I remember lifting my head up a little bit, just enough to see the street. And all of a sudden I saw some headlights coming down the street towards us. And I immediately started thinking, this is going to be the getaway car. He has this so well planned out. This is the getaway car. So even if the police eventually make it to my home and they bring dogs in to try to track me, to try to find out where I've gone, they'll track me up to this moment. But then this car will just disappear. No one's going to find me. Well, the car was going slow, but it didn't slow down any further. It didn't stop. It kept on going. And actually, as it passed right in front of me. I remember seeing the word police written alongside the car. And I remember in that moment seeing it cross in front of me and thinking, it's okay. Like, the police know everything's fine. The police are on the case. They're gonna, like, they know I'm gone. They're looking for me. It's gonna be just fine. Of course, in that moment, the police did not know that I had been kidnapped. They had no idea who I was. And there was no way he could have seen us. I mean, it was a dark night and we were behind the bushes and there would have been nothing to see. And so as soon as this police car was around the corner from where we were at, there was this man again who had kidnapped me, pulling me up off the ground and having me run across the road as fast as I could. And I remember we started up a trailhead that started on the other side of the road. And it goes into the mountains a little bit, but it mostly stays on the face of the mountains and overlooks the Salt Lake Valley. And instead of staying on the trail and coming back, it kind of had gone up into this little canyon and crossed over, and it comes down the other side and continues on the face of the mountain. Instead of coming down, he'd pushed me off the trail and he told me to keep going. And I remember just feeling panicked in that moment. I remember stopping and turning to him and saying, well, if you're just going to rape and kill me, could you please do it here? Because it was important to me that my parents know what had happened to me. I mean, I wanted them to know that I hadn't run away. I wanted them to know that this wasn't my choice, which truthfully, I honestly don't think they would have thought that of me anyway. I was not a rebellious kid. And I mean, like, my mom was my best friend. We really didn't fight. I mean, maybe she got on at me when I didn't like do my practicing or my room wasn't clean, but we had a good relationship. I would have never have run away as a kid. And I think my mom knew that. But in that moment, that fear was in my mind. And so when I had asked him if he was going to rape and kill me, could he do it there? I remember he just looked back at me and he smiled and he said, I know exactly, well, I'm not going to rape and kill you yet. And we went on farther. And that's when I stopped him again. I said, well, don't you realize what you're doing? If you get caught, you'll spend the rest of your life in prison. But, you know, if you let me go, it'll be like this never happened. My family won't press any charges. Just please let me go. And I remember that's when he looked back at me and that's when he smiled. And he was like, I know exactly what I'm doing. The only difference is I'm not going to get caught. And beyond that, there really was not a lot of conversation. I remember asking him questions and he'd respond to things by saying, like, you'll find out in due time, you'll find out. I mean, at one point he did tell me I was his hostage. And I remember saying, my parents will give you anything you want, just please let me go. But he really didn't say a whole lot more after that moment. And I remember it had gotten really difficult, actually, to continue on in the direction he told me to. There was a lot of brush, and there were trees, and there was a lot of scrub oak. And I mean, we were climbing up the mountainside, and we had actually gotten to the top of the mountain. And he was in a rush to get me off the top of the mountain because my pajamas were bright red, and he was worried that someone highly adventurous would notice the reds on top of the mountain. And so he was hurrying me down the other side of the mountain. And we truthfully were not that far down the other side of the mountain. We were still pretty close to the top, but far enough down that it would be very unlikely that anyone would happen to stumble into this specific area. And we came to a stand of trees. I mean, that wasn't that strange because we fought our way up through all of these trees. It looked the same to me as all the other trees we'd fought our way through, but somehow he knew this specific stand of trees and he directed me into the center of it where I saw that there was a tent set up. And outside of the tent, there were some tarps lying on the ground and there were some tarps hanging up in the trees. And I remember a woman walking out of the tent. And when I first saw this woman, I thought, nothing that bad can happen to me. Everything is going to be okay because there's another woman here and she would never let anyone hurt me. Everything is going to be okay. Well, she brought me inside of the tent. She sat me down on this upturned bucket. She started to take off my shoes. She started to try to wash the dirt off my feet. And then she reached for the buttons on my pajamas. And I remember just being shocked. that she was trying to undress me. I remember grabbing hold of the buttons on my pajamas. I remember clamping my elbows down next to my torso. What did she think she was doing? Why was she trying to undress me? She kept on saying that she needed to sponge bathe me and that she was just getting me ready. And in my mind, I couldn't understand. What did she think she was getting me ready for? What was she doing? And I remember just begging and pleading with her to leave me alone. I wasn't dirty. I had just showered last night before I went to bed. What? Why? Why was she doing this? Well, she actually gave in. She passed me this tunic sort of robe, and she told me to put it on. And I did, and then she had me take off all my clothes and underwear and everything off underneath. And I did, because I didn't want her to tear them off me. I didn't want the man to come in and touch me. So I did what she said, because that's what she had threatened me with. And then once I'd done that, she scooped up my clothes, and she got up, and she walked out of the tent with them. And I just remember sitting on this upturned bucket, being so terrified. What was happening? What was going to happen next? Why were they doing this to me? What were their plans for the future? Why would anybody want to kidnap me? I'd never hurt anybody. I'd never done anything wrong. I wasn't rebellious or wild. I was definitely more of the wallflower than anything else. Why was this happening to me? And what about my family? Had my sister woke up yet? Did she realize I was gone? Did she wake up to a house full of dead people? Is that why, is that why my parents hadn't woken up when I was being taken out of the house? Did they know I was gone yet? Well, of course, I didn't find out what was going on back at my home until after I was rescued. And that's when my little sister told me that actually she was awake when I was kidnapped. She watched me be taken out of bed at knife point next to her. And she said she'd laid in bed just not moving because she was so scared. And she'd waited to hear the alarm go off to know whether or not it was safe to go tell my parents. But the alarm, again, had never gone off. So she laid there just waiting and waiting and waiting. And she was about 5 years younger than me. So she was about 9 years old at the time. And finally, she decided she couldn't wait any longer. Even though she hadn't heard the alarm go off, she knew she had to go in and tell my parents. So she said, well, she had this ratty old baby blanket. I used to think it was the grossest blanket ever. She slept with it every single night since the day she was born. And it was exactly what you imagine it to be. And she said how she just wrapped it around her shoulders and kind of had it draped over her head. And she ran to my parents' room as quietly and as quickly as she could. And my dad's side of the bed was closest to the door, so she went to his side first. But he was in a pretty deep sleep, so he didn't immediately wake up. So then she went around to my mom's side of the bed, and my mom woke up, and she's like, Mary Catherine, what's wrong? Tell me what's going on. Like, why are you out of bed? You should be asleep right now. And my little sister said, Mom, Elizabeth is gone. She's not here anymore. And my mom, she just responded, she's like, no. She's like, Elizabeth's here. She's fine. And by this point, my dad woke up, and he's like, no, Elizabeth is fine. Like, it's fine. Everything's fine. You need to go back to bed. It's the middle of the night. Like, you just had a bad dream. And my little sister was adamant, no, Elizabeth is not here. She's gone. And my parents were like, you probably were just like stealing the covers again or kicking too much in your sleep, which I had begged my parents for my own room for years. I mean, I wanted my own room so bad, but they never let us have our own room. I wanted my own bed so bad because I love my little sister. We are very, very close, but I hate sleeping next to her. Like, I hate it. She is very hot when she sleeps. She sweats in her sleep, which she probably wouldn't want me to tell you that now. But then she just like, I don't like being touched when I sleep. I mean, didn't like it back then. I still don't like it now. I mean, when my husband and I go to bed, there's like a wall of pillows between us. Like, neither of us want to be touched when we're sleeping. And, but my sister, she was just like a heat-seeking missile. Even though she was sweating during her sleep, she'd like cuddle right up next to me, and I'd move a little bit, and then she'd cuddle up to me again, and I'd move a little bit more. And I'd keep moving till I was on the very edge of the bed, and she had like 4 feet on the other side of her. And finally, I'd just give up and be like, you know what? I'm not sleeping next to you. You're a nightmare to sleep next to. And so my youngest brother, I've got 4 brothers, and my youngest brother, he was about 3 years old at the time. and he hadn't fully transitioned to the toddler bed from the crib. So sometimes I'd go into his room and I'd sleep on the toddler bed, which was a terrible option, but sometimes I still did it just because it was better than sleeping next to my sister. Or sometimes I'd go down into the kitchen and I'd sleep on the sofa. It wasn't that uncommon for me to go find somewhere else to sleep. So my parents just were like, it's okay, you had a bad dream. We're going to find Elizabeth and we'll get you both back to bed. And so they start going and checking all my brother's rooms. Of course, I wasn't in any of their rooms. And then my parents are heading downstairs and my little sister's following behind them. And she keeps on saying, you're not going to find her. A man came and took her. And of course, with this little voice at the back of their head saying a man came and took her, the longer they can't find me, the more worried they become. At the bottom of the stairs, my dad turns left into like the formal living room, which, I mean, none of us were allowed to breathe in that room. So why they thought I'd be in there is beyond me. And my mom, she turned right and she ran straight into the kitchen and she just slammed on all the lights. And her eye immediately went to the window above the sink where she saw it had been forced open and the screen had been cut. And again, there was my little sister in the background saying, you're not going to find her. A man had a gun and he took her. And in that moment, my mom knew that what my little sister was saying was true. And she had just screamed out to my dad, call the police. At which point I was then informed that just pure chaos ensued and broke out. But of course, I didn't find that out until after I'd been rescued. Back to where I was on the mountainside, sitting on this upturned bucket after I'd just been forced to change out of my pajamas. The woman had left the tent, and all of a sudden the man, he came back into the tent, and he had changed out of like the dark sweatpants and sweatshirt that he had worn to kidnap me, and he had put on a long robe, tunic, like the one the woman had on, like the one I've been forced to put on. And he came in and he knelt down next to me and he started speaking. And I was terrified. Why? Why was all this going on? What was going to happen next? And initially I really wasn't paying attention to what he was saying, but then I had the thought that maybe I should, because maybe there'd be some clue or some reason as to why he was doing this and what was going to happen next. And did my family, were they okay? Were they alive? What was going on? So I calmed down and I only heard the last sentence that he said, which was probably the worst sentence, which was when he told me that I was now his wife. And everything I expected to hear, that certainly was not one of them. I remember just screaming out no, because how could he think that that was okay? And I remember he looked at me and he said, if you ever scream out like that again, I will kill you. If it'll help you to not scream out, I can duct tape your mouth shut. Well, I knew I didn't want to be killed. I knew I didn't want my mouth duct taped shut, but he had to realize this was not okay. And so I remember trying to explain to him why this wasn't okay, why this wasn't legal, as many reasons and excuses as I could possibly think of as to why this wasn't okay. And every reason that I gave him, he had the same response, which was, it's now time to consummate our marriage. Well, I'd never heard that phrase before. I did not know what he meant. I remember just sitting there thinking, what does he mean? And sort of, again, to help you get to know me a little bit better at that age, I'd only learned what sex was a couple years earlier, and it's because my friend who lived across the street decided to tell me. And I remember when she told me what it was, I was so horrified. I was so disgusted. I remember just looking at her and being like, what is wrong with you? Sex? That is the nastiest thing I have ever heard of in my life. I was like, how did you even think that up? And she's like, oh no, I didn't think it up. She's like, my parents had the doctor down the street come and explain it to us all at family night. She's like, you want to talk about horrifying? That was it. And I remember just looking at her and being like, oh, I will never, ever do that. And she's like, no, Elizabeth, it's how babies are made. And I was like, no, it's not. My mom told me you grow up, you get married, you fall in love, you get married, and then when you're ready to have a baby, you pray. And you pray really, really hard, and then God sends you a baby. And she's like, Elizabeth, that is legitimately the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I can't believe you believe that. And I was like, well, my mom told me. She said that's how babies are made. She's like, no, believe me, sex is how babies are made. And I just remember sitting there and looking at her, and I remember saying, you're trying to tell me that men have magic pee, and they magically pee inside you, and then you're pregnant. It's all this magic pee. I was like, that is the worst thing I have ever heard. There will be no magic pee in my life. Anyway, from the time that I learned what sex was to the time that I was kidnapped, I wouldn't say that my thoughts on sex had changed a whole lot, other than I accepted it as a fact of life. I had been forced to watch The Miracle of Life in junior high, which seemed more like a horror of life rather than the miracle. But that was really as far as I'd gone. It was just a fact of life, and it wasn't something I was interested in. It wasn't anything that I wanted to know about. I mean, it just still seemed gross and nasty to me. So as this man is sitting there saying, it's now time to consummate our marriage, it's now time to consummate our marriage, I had this thought come to my mind of what it could possibly mean. And I remember at first thinking, no, there's no way that one human being could possibly be that evil to do that to another human being. There's no way that's possible. Unfortunately, though, I found out that yes, those people do exist, because ultimately it didn't matter how much I begged or cried or pleaded or fought. He forced me on the ground and raped me. And when he was done, he stood up and he smiled and he acted like it wasn't a big deal. And he turned around and walked out of the tent. But for me, I remember feeling absolutely devastated. I remember feeling absolutely destroyed. I mean, physically, I was in a lot of pain. I remember seeing blood running down my legs. But emotionally, I was in a lot of pain. And then actually, I was raised in a very conservative Christian household. I don't know how many Sundays I went to church, and during Sunday school, there were lessons on chastity, purity, and virtue, and they all seemed to be the same thing, which was don't have sex before marriage. And in none of these lessons had anyone ever addressed that there is a difference between, loving intimacy versus rape and sexual abuse. So in my little 14-year-old mind, it all seemed to be the same thing. So now, spiritually, I felt ruined as well. Who would ever want me now? I was dirty. I was filthy. No man would ever be able to love me. No one would ever want to take me out on a date. I was worthless. I genuinely felt that way. And at that point, I don't know if I fell asleep or if I just passed out, but one of the two happened. And when I woke up, there was my captor kneeling over me again, and this time he had a piece of metal cable, and he was wrapping it around my ankle, and he was crushing bolts into place so that I couldn't untwist it or break through it in any way. It was very, very tight. It was very secure. There was no way I was getting out of this cable, of these chains. I was effectively chained up. And I remember standing up to see what I was chained between. And I was chained between two trees, and I had just enough movement to lie down inside the tent, and then to reach the bucket. I could move maybe 12 feet, and that was about it. And I just remember sitting on the ground, feeling absolutely devastated, feeling like my life was over, feeling like there was no point in trying to survive anything because nobody would ever want me back. And if my parents knew what had happened, well, they would just think it's a good thing that we had 6 kids, because even without Elizabeth, we still have 5, and 5 is a lot of kids. I genuinely thought my parents would think that. And I remember as I looked around this hidden camp, I noticed that there were big containers that had food in it. I noticed, there was quite a lot of bedding. I noticed just how well prepared this hidden campsite was, and it struck me that these people had already been here for a while and that they planned on keeping me here for a while. And that thought kind of scared me. What was a while? Were we talking days, weeks, years? What if it was so long that I forgot who I was? Because almost immediately my captors had told me that my name wasn't Elizabeth anymore, that I wasn't allowed to talk about my family, that I wasn't allowed to talk about myself, that I just had to obey everything that they wanted of me. And if I didn't, there would be very severe consequences. And I remember thinking, okay, well, I don't want to be hurt any more than I already have. I don't like, maybe if I'm nice, maybe if I do what they want, they'll like me a little bit. And maybe if they like me a little bit, it'll make it harder for them to kill me because they like me. So maybe if I do what they say, I won't be killed immediately. I remember having that thought. I remember just being so worried that everything that they were saying was going to somehow magically erase my childhood, my life prior to being kidnapped. And so I remember just making up my mind that I was going to do everything I could to remember my family, remember everything that I could, so that I'd never forget who I truly was. And I remember as I'm sitting there trying to just immortalize my family and my life into my mind, I had a memory pop forward, and it was of my mom. And I'd come home one day from school, I'd been upset, and she'd asked me what was wrong, and I told her how I'd been bullied. And she went on and she was like, Elizabeth, you'll meet so many people in your lifetime, and so many opinions will be made of you. And sometimes, sometimes people won't like you for no good reason. They just won't like you. Maybe it's the color of your hair, or maybe it's because they perceive you a certain way. But you cannot live to try to please everyone. You will never make everyone happy. So ultimately, you need to decide whose opinions actually matter. Does this girl you go to school with who bullied you, does her opinion of you actually matter? Are you going to let her decide whether or not you're happy? And I hated it when my mom did that, honestly. She was always the kind of mom that was like, what do you do when a horse bucks you off? You get back on. What do you do when you fall down? You get back up. What do you do when you fell? You keep trying. That was like her motto through my entire childhood. You never give up. And if you're not working to fix a problem, you're part of the problem. That was just her my whole life. And so I always hated it when she was like, oh, are you going to let this girl decide whether you're happy or not? Are you going to let someone else make these decisions for you? Loathed that. And even still to this day, sometimes I'm like, seriously, Mom, I know you've told me it all, but just feel sorry. Let me feel sorry for myself for like 5 seconds, please. Just listen. It's fine. She's great. It's fine. But seriously, she went on, she's like, of all the people whose opinions will be made about you, the few that actually count, I can help you out with the first few opinions that actually matter. The first opinion that matters is God's. And guess what, Elizabeth? He will always love you. He will never turn his back on you. Only you can turn your back on him. The second person's opinion that you should worry about, well, that would be mine. And guess what? I am your mom. I will always love you. Nothing can ever change that. I might not always agree with you. I might not always, like the people you decide to be with or the places you decide to go, but I will always, always, always love you. And nothing can ever change that. And as I sat on this mountainside, remembering my mom telling me that, I realized that she was right. I realized that she would always love me and that nothing could ever change that. And so I made the most important decision I could have during my entire 9 months of captivity. I decided I would do whatever it took to survive. It didn't matter what it was. If it meant that I would live another day, then I was going to do it. If it meant that I was going to survive, I was going to do whatever it took. And that's how I survived the next 9 months. And the next 9 months were the worst 9 months of my life. There wasn't a day that went by that I wasn't raped. Most of the times, multiple times a day. There wasn't a day that went by that I wasn't threatened, or that I wasn't living in fear, or that I felt like my life was on the brink of ending. I mean, there were so many times that I felt like it was so close to being done, and not like the happily ever after kind of being done. But somehow I made it through every single day, and I will never forget the day that I was rescued. During my captivity, my captors had taken me to Southern California for the winter because we wouldn't have survived a winter in northern Utah. And I'd convinced them to return back to Salt Lake, and I'd convinced them that it was a good idea to hitchhike back, because in my mind I thought, surely someone among the random strangers that hopefully pick us up is going to notice something is off, and they're going to report it to the police, and I'm going to be rescued, and it's going to be fine. Well, it didn't exactly turn out that way, but almost. We ended up hitchhiking all the way back to Utah, which that is not my preferred mode of transportation whatsoever, but it did the job. And I remember we were walking up State Street in Salt Lake City, which it's a busy street. It's a big street. It's heavily populated. And I remember all of a sudden a police car pulling up, and then another one and another one. And I remember all these policemen jumping out of their cars and running up to us. And I don't even remember how many police officers there were, but it felt like there were a lot. And they started asking my captors questions. And of course, they had a whole backstory planned. And they started giving answers that they had planned to give. And I mean, I was standing right in between both of them. Both of them were touching. Both of them were on either side of me. So, I mean, it certainly didn't feel like a safe place to say who I was. And even when the police officers started questioning me, I still didn't feel safe because, again, they were standing right next to me. I had 9 months of rape and abuse and manipulation and threats being held over me. I knew exactly what my captors were capable of. I didn't know what the police were capable of. I didn't know if they were capable of rescuing me, of protecting me. I'd never had a interaction with police officers before this moment, except when the DARE officer came to my classroom in 5th grade to talk about don't do drugs. But other than that, I'd never met a police officer. I'd never had any interaction with them. So I did not know what they were capable of. And honestly, they weren't very gentle. I mean, they were pretty abrasive in that moment, which made me even more scared to speak, because who was going to be worse? I mean, was I going from the frying pan to the fire? I didn't know. If they thought I was innocent, wouldn't they be nice to me? Wouldn't they be gentle with me? Wouldn't they be like, hey, it's safe, we're here to help you? But it very much was not that. And I remember it wasn't until one of the officers separated me from my captors, and he started to question me on my own. And he said, there's a girl and she's been missing now for a very long time, and her family has never stopped searching for her. Aren't you ready to go home? It was really only then, in that moment, that I was able to admit who I was. I remember I was then handcuffed and put in the back of the car and taken to the police station, which then I thought, wait, they handcuffed me. They really think I'm guilty of something. And if they thought I was innocent, like, wouldn't they just take me home? Why are they taking me to the police station? And don't I get a call? Like, if they thought I was innocent, then wouldn't they let me call my parents? Why don't I thought all the crime shows make it sound like you get a phone call when you're taken to jail. I thought that's what it is. Like, why don't I get that? If I'm going to jail, what's going on? I remember just being very scared. And I was brought into this little room, and I mean, in my mind, it feels like I was left alone, but I think actually there was an officer in the room with me. And I just remember being scared. And then all of a sudden, I remember the door just burst open, and my dad came running into the room. And I remember he just immediately grabbed me into the biggest hug you can imagine. And I remember he just kept on crying and saying over and over, Elizabeth, is it really you? Is it really you? And it took me a minute to respond, because I thought I was in trouble. I thought I was going to jail. And then all of a sudden my dad's there suffocating me without any warning. But I remember when the dots finally connected, I remember for the first time feeling like it was going to be okay. Feeling like I didn't know what the future held, but it was going to be okay because my dad was there, and he was never going to let another person hurt me again. I remember I was eventually transported up to the main downtown Salt Lake Police headquarters where my mom was and my brothers. And I remember seeing them again for the first time. I remember being brought to the hospital later that day, where a rape kit was performed. And I remember finally going home that evening and feeling like, honestly, a princess. I mean, there was carpet and there was running water, and my home felt so beautiful and it felt so safe and so welcoming. And I remember being so excited to take a shower. I hadn't taken a shower in 9 months. I was just so excited. I felt like everything in that moment that had been taken away from me had all of a sudden been given back. Um, and I remember the following morning I was in speaking with my mom, and she looked at me and she said, Elizabeth, what these people have done to you is terrible. And there aren't words strong to describe how wicked and evil they are. They've stolen 9 months of your life that you will never get back. But the best punishment you could ever give them is to be happy, is to live your life. Don't let them steal a single second more of your life away from you. And truthfully, I have always tried to follow her advice. Not always perfectly, but I have always tried it. And I think actually it's probably pretty good advice for all of us, because I know every single one of us in this room has a story. I recognize they're all different, but I'm sure every single one of us at some point in our lives have felt like we didn't want to get out of bed and we wanted to pull the covers back up over our head, and we've thought, this is too hard. I can't do this. I don't want to do this. I'm done trying. I'm sure we've all felt that way. But I think what my mom was trying to tell me is that it's not, she wasn't trying to say, oh, just make the decision to be happy and your problems will melt away, if only that were the case. I think what she was trying to tell me was, don't ever give up. Don't ever, ever give up on yourself, because life is worth living, and you will never fully understand the impact that you have on other people around you. So you should never, ever give up. And as I have moved forward in my life, and as I've gotten more and more into the field of advocacy, I am so grateful for the survivors that came before me and shared their story with me, because when I was first rescued, after like the fireworks ended of coming home, I ended up feeling incredibly lonely because I didn't hear anybody else sharing their story. I didn't hear the topics of rape and sexual violence being spoken about. I didn't hear anyone sharing their experiences with it. It took years before I met other survivors who openly talked about their stories, and I'm so grateful to them for having the strength and courage of sharing their stories, because that helps me realize that I wasn't alone. And as I've heard more and more stories over the years, I've realized my story, again, is nothing special. In fact, probably the most special thing about my story is that it was strangers that kidnapped me and hurt me. The vast majority of stories that I've heard were family members, were people that you knew or that they trusted or that should have been people to protect you. They were someone who had access and someone who was kind of in that circle of trust in their life, who ultimately ended up being the ones abusing them or first getting them into exploiting them. And so now, as I go out and share my story and I speak about it, I want to recognize just the courage and the vast amount of bravery that all survivors have, because I can't imagine how much more difficult it would be when they have experienced betrayal at such a deep level by someone that they knew that maybe was their initial start, their initial, I don't want to say introduction, that makes it sound like a good thing, but like what first happened to them that led to the horrors that they've experienced in their life. I can't imagine that. And yet we see them coming back all the time. We see them surviving, and not just surviving, but winning, reclaiming happiness, moving forward in their life, being such a strength and a voice for other survivors. I think that is absolutely incredible and amazing. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of the survivors who have shared their story, particularly those who shared them with me before I found the courage to share my own story. And I also want to acknowledge and say thank you to um, Breaking the Chains, because we need you. Survivors need you. And so, with that being said, thank you and God bless you.